Get rid of it. 3 words. Spoken in the same tone Carlos Gould used to order executions. The same flat, emotionless delivery that had built his reputation across 3 states as a man who didn't negotiate, didn't hesitate, and definitely didn't waste time on problems that could be eliminated. I was the problem. More specifically, the pregnancy I'd just told him about was the problem. We were standing in his office. 47th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city he controlled more thoroughly than any elected official ever could. He was behind his desk, mahogany, imported, the kind of desk that cost more than most people's cars. I was in front of it, still holding the positive pregnancy test I'd taken that morning in my apartment bathroom. I'd practiced the conversation 100 times in my head on the drive over. How to tell him, how to frame it, whether to lead with logistics or emotion or just the bare facts. I'd settled on the truth, delivered simply. Carlos, I'm pregnant. He'd looked up from his laptop, studied me for exactly 3 seconds, then said those 3 words that would define the next 6 years of my life. Get rid of it. Not a question. Not a suggestion, a command. The same way he commanded everything in his world, with the absolute certainty that what he said would be done, because Carlos Gould's word was law. Carlos. Stephanie. He leaned back in his chair, looked at me the way you look at an employee who's just made a predictable mistake. You knew the terms when we started this.
No complications. No entanglements. No permanence.
This, he gestured at my stomach, which wasn't even showing yet, is a complication. Handle it. I'm not getting rid of. Then we're done. He returned his attention to his laptop. Dismissed me, without another word. The way he dismissed everyone who'd served their purpose and was no longer useful. I stood there for 10 more seconds, waiting for him to look up, to change his mind, to show some flicker of the man I'd thought I'd known for the past 8 months. He didn't. I left his office, took the elevator down 47 floors, walked to my car in the parking garage, drove home, and I did not get rid of it. I kept the pregnancy, carried it to term, gave birth on a Tuesday afternoon in March to twin boys, 8 pounds each, identical in every way that mattered, both of them screaming their arrival into the world with the kind of furious determination that would define their personalities for years to come. I named them Daniel and David, after my father and my grandfather. Men who'd stayed. Men who'd chosen their families over convenience. Men nothing like Carlos Gould. For 6 years, I raised those boys alone. Worked 2 jobs to keep them fed and clothed. Moved 3 times to stay ahead of rent increases. Built a life that was small and exhausting and entirely mine. Carlos Gould never knew they existed. He never asked what I'd done. Never followed up. Never checked to see if I'd obeyed his command. In his world, when you gave an order, it was followed. End of story. Except it wasn't the end. Because 6 years after I walked out of his office, 6 years after he told me to eliminate the complication, I saw him again. Not by accident. Not by coincidence. By design. And when Carlos Gould, the man who'd built an empire on control and precision, looked at my twin boys for the first time, something in his carefully constructed world fractured. Because Daniel and David Moody looked exactly like him. And there was no way, absolutely no way, he could deny what he'd thrown away. A mafia boss ordered his pregnant girlfriend to get rid of it and she refused? And she raised twin boys in secret for 6 years? And now he's seeing them for the first time and they look exactly like him? Subscribe right now, because what happens when a man who controls everything realizes he threw away the one thing he can never get back is going to destroy you. Carlos Gould is about to learn what consequences actually feel like. My name is Stephanie Moody. I am 32 years old, mother of 6-year-old twin boys, former paralegal, current office manager at a mid-sized accounting firm that pays just enough to keep the lights on and the boys fed. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that's safe enough, but not nice enough to brag about. I drive a 10-year-old sedan with a check engine light that's been on for 8 months. My life is not glamorous. It's not easy, but it's mine. It wasn't always this way. 6 years ago, I was a paralegal at Morrison & Blake, one of the largest law firms in the city. Good salary, nice apartment, a career trajectory that looked promising. I was 26 and believed that hard work and strategic choices could overcome almost any obstacle. That was before Carlos Gould walked into my life. I should explain something about Carlos before this story goes any further, because understanding who he really is essential to understanding why I made every choice that followed. Carlos Gould is 41 years old, American, third-generation criminal who inherited an organization from his father and expanded it into something his grandfather would never have recognized: sophisticated, diversified, almost invisible to law enforcement. He doesn't deal drugs on street corners. He doesn't run protection rackets. He doesn't do any of the stereotypical mafia activities that people imagine when they think of organized crime. Carlos Gould owns legitimate businesses.
Dozens of them.
Restaurants, real estate holdings, tech startups, investment portfolios. All of it perfectly legal on paper. All of it generating millions in revenue annually. The illegal part, the part that makes him a criminal rather than just a successful businessman, is how those businesses started. The money that seeded them. The leverage that protected them. The quiet, devastating consequences for anyone who competed too aggressively or investigated too thoroughly. Carlos doesn't threaten people directly. He doesn't need to. His reputation is the threat. The knowledge that crossing Carlos Gould means your business mysteriously loses key contracts, your bank freezes your accounts for no clear reason, your personal information ends up in the hands of people who know exactly how to use it. He's not violent. He's strategic. And that makes him more dangerous than any street thug with a gun. I met him through work. Morrison & Blake represented several of his legitimate businesses. I was assigned to handle the paperwork for a real estate acquisition, routine, professional, nothing unusual. Carlos came to the firm for a meeting. I was in the conference room preparing documents. He walked in early. We talked. That was it. That's how it started. A conversation about property zoning that somehow became a conversation about art, which became a conversation about travel, which became dinner that weekend. I knew who he was. Or rather, I knew the rumors. Everyone in the legal world knew the rumors about Carlos Gould, the perfectly legitimate businessman with connections that ran too deep and luck that ran too good to be entirely clean. But he was charming, intelligent, genuinely interested in things I said. And when you're 26 and someone that powerful pays attention to you, really pays attention the way Carlos did, it's intoxicating. We dated for 8 months. Not publicly. Carlos was extremely private about his personal life. We met at his apartment, never at restaurants where we might be photographed. He never introduced me to anyone in his organization, kept me completely separate from his professional world. At the time, I told myself it was romantic, protective, our own private world. Looking back, I understand what it actually was: control. Carlos Gould controlled every aspect of his life, including me. And the moment I became uncontrollable, the moment I represented a variable he couldn't manage, he eliminated me from the equation. With 3 words: get rid of it. I didn't get rid of it, obviously. What I did instead was disappear. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would draw attention from Carlos or anyone in his orbit. I just stepped out of his world and back into mine. I quit Morrison & Blake the day after that conversation in his office. Gave 2 weeks' notice, cited personal reasons, and walked away from a job that had taken me 3 years to get. Then I moved. New apartment. Different neighborhood. Across town from anywhere Carlos might accidentally encounter me. I changed my phone number. Deleted all my social media accounts. Became as invisible as someone can become in a modern city, while still holding down a job and preparing for the reality of raising a child alone. I was 3 months pregnant when I found out it was twins. The ultrasound technician had paused, moved the wand, looked more carefully, then smiled. Congratulations. It's 2.
2.
Not 1 complication Carlos had ordered me to eliminate.
2.
I'd sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes after that appointment, staring at the ultrasound photos and thought, he's going to be furious if he ever finds out. But he wasn't going to find out, because I was gone. And Carlos Gould didn't chase what he'd discarded. The boys were born healthy, identical, 8 pounds each, which my doctor said was unusually large for twins. They came early, 36 weeks instead of 40, but strong.
No complications.
No NICU time. Just 2 loud, demanding, perfect babies who made it immediately clear that sleep was optional and that I was now operating on their schedule, not mine. I named them Daniel and David. Daniel came first, screaming. David came 90 seconds later, quieter but watching everything with dark, serious eyes. From the beginning, they were different. Daniel was loud, physical, constantly moving. David was thoughtful, observant, the one who studied situations before acting. But they looked identical. Same dark hair, same sharp features, same expressions that, as they grew older, became impossible to miss. They looked like their father, exactly like their father. Every time I looked at them, every time Daniel grinned that particular half-smile, or David tilted his head in that precise analytical way, I saw Carlos Gould staring back at me. And I thought, he threw this away. He ordered me to get rid of this. Raising twins alone is not romantic. It's not an inspiring single-mother triumph narrative where everything works out through determination and love. It's exhausting, financially crushing, isolating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I worked 2 jobs for the first 3 years of their lives. Office manager during the day, freelance document review at night after the boys went to bed. My mother helped when she could, but she lived 2 hours away and had her own health problems. Daycare ate half my salary. The other half went to rent, food, utilities, and the constant, grinding expenses of raising 2 children who grew out of clothes faster than I could buy them. I had no social life.
No dating.
No time for anything beyond work and the boys. But I never regretted it. Not once. Because Daniel and David were mine.
Entirely mine.
They knew no other life than the one we built together, small but stable, broke but safe, exhausting but ours. Carlos Gould had given me an order. Eliminate the complication. What he'd actually done was give me the 2 most important people in my life. And he had no idea they existed. Until 6 years later, when I made sure he found out. I planned it for 3 weeks. Not impulsively. Not emotionally. With the same careful strategy I'd learned during my years as a paralegal building cases that couldn't be challenged. The encounter had to look accidental. Had to be in a public location where Carlos couldn't control the situation. Had to happen when the boys were with me because seeing them was the entire point. I chose Harbor Park. Saturday afternoon. A charity event Carlos's company was sponsoring, one of his legitimate businesses funding a children's hospital fundraiser.
Public.
Visible. The kind of event where Carlos would appear for exactly 90 minutes, shake the right hands, write the right checks, and leave. I'd seen the announcement in the business section of the newspaper. Had confirmed his attendance through sources I still had from my Morrison and Blake days. Daniel and David didn't know why we were going to the park that Saturday. I told them it was a festival with games and food. They were 6. That explanation was sufficient. We arrived at 2 p.m. The event was already crowded. Families everywhere. Children running. Exactly the kind of chaotic environment Carlos Gould would hate. I walked the boys through the crowd slowly, deliberately, past the face painting station, past the balloon animals, toward the VIP section where sponsors gathered behind a velvet rope that was more symbolic than actual security. And then I saw him, Carlos Gould, standing near the sponsor tent, talking to someone I recognized from the city council, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, looking exactly like he had 6 years ago, controlled, composed, untouchable. Daniel saw him first. "Mommy, that man looks like us." I stopped, looked down at my son. Daniel was staring at Carlos with a kind of direct, unfiltered curiosity that 6-year-olds have, the kind that notices patterns adults have trained themselves to ignore. "What do you mean, honey?" His face. "It's like our faces. See?" Daniel pointed. David, quieter as always, was also staring. Not with Daniel's open fascination, with something more analytical, more unsettling. "He has the same eyes," David said quietly. And in that moment, before I could decide whether to move closer or retreat entirely, Carlos turned. His eyes swept across the crowd, past dozens of families, hundreds of people, and landed directly on us. I watched it happen in real time. The moment of casual dismissal, just another family at a charity event. Then the pause, the focus, the sudden, complete attention that Carlos Gould gave to anything that didn't immediately make sense. He was looking at Daniel, at David, at their faces, then at me. Recognition came slowly. I could see it happening, the mental calculation, the processing. He knew me, knew my face even after 6 years. But the context was wrong. The location was wrong. The children were. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Carlos Gould didn't do drama. But something shifted. Some tightening around his eyes that I'd learned to read during our 8 months together.
Shock.
Rapidly suppressed. Replaced with analysis. He was looking at the boys. Really looking. Studying their faces with the same intensity he'd once used to study contracts and acquisitions.
And he was seeing it.
The resemblance. The undeniable, genetic truth written across Daniel and David's features. I watched him reach the conclusion. Saw the precise moment when Carlos Gould, a man who built his entire life on knowing everything before anyone else, realized he'd missed something massive. He started walking toward us. Not quickly. Carlos never moved quickly in public, but deliberately, closing the distance between the VIP section and the general crowd. Daniel was pulling on my hand. "Mommy, can we get a balloon?" "In a minute, baby." Carlos was 10 feet away now. Then 5. He stopped directly in front of me, looked at my face, then at Daniel, at David. "Stephanie." His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Controlled. Revealing nothing. "Carlos." I kept my voice equally neutral. "These are," he stopped. Started again. "How old are they?" 6. The math was instant. Visible. 6 years ago. 8 months together. The pregnancy I'd told him about. The order he'd given. "You didn't," he stopped himself again. Looked at the boys, who were both staring at him with unfiltered curiosity. "Get rid of it?"
No.
I didn't. The silence stretched. Around us, the charity event continued. Music. Laughter. Children playing. A completely normal Saturday afternoon. Except nothing about this was normal. "We need to talk," Carlos said quietly.
No.
"We don't. Stephanie. You made your position very clear 6 years ago. This," I gestured at Daniel and David, "was a complication you didn't want. So I handled it. On my own. For 6 years. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference." I took both boys' hands. "Come on, guys. Let's get those balloons." I walked past him, deliberately, giving him the same dismissal he'd given me 6 years ago in his office. Behind me, I heard him say my name again. I didn't turn around, but I felt his eyes on us. On the boys. On the children he'd ordered me to eliminate and who were now standing in front of him. Undeniable and impossible to ignore. Daniel looked back. Waved. The way 6-year-olds wave at strangers who seem interesting. Carlos didn't wave back.
Just stood there.
Completely still. A man who controlled everything in his world suddenly confronted with the one thing he couldn't control. Consequence. Carlos called me that night. I don't know how he got my number. It had been changed 6 years ago. deliberately unlisted. But Carlos Gould had resources that made unlisted phone numbers irrelevant. I let it go to voicemail the first time, and the second, and the third. On the fourth call, I answered. Stephanie, we need to talk. It's 9 p.m. My children are asleep. Whatever you think we need to discuss can wait. This can't wait. His voice carried an edge I rarely heard, something close to urgency. I need to know, are they mine? Does it matter?
Yes.
It matters. I was quiet for a moment, sitting on my couch in my small apartment, holding a phone pressed to my ear, talking to a man I'd deliberately avoided for 6 years. They're yours, I said finally. Daniel and David. Identical twins. Born 8 months after the last time we spoke. And yes, before you ask, you're listed as unknown on their birth certificates. Because when I tried to list you, my lawyer pointed out that doing so would open legal complications. I didn't have the resources to fight. Why didn't you tell me? The question was so absurd, I actually laughed. You're joking, right? Carlos, you ordered me to get rid of it. Those were your exact words. Not, let's discuss options. Not, this is complicated, but we'll figure it out. You gave me an order like I was one of your employees, and when I didn't immediately comply, you ended the conversation. What exactly about that interaction suggested you wanted to be informed about my pregnancy? I thought you'd done what you told me to do? Yeah, you thought I'd obeyed. Because that's what people do in your world, right? You give orders, they follow them, end of story. Stephanie. I'm hanging up now. Don't call again. Wait. Something in his voice made me pause. Not quite desperation. Carlos didn't do desperation. But close. I need to see them again.
Properly.
Not at a park. Somewhere we can actually talk. Why? Because they're my sons. And he stopped. Started again. I need to know them. You had 6 years to need that. You chose differently. I didn't know they existed. Because you didn't ask. Because you assumed your order was followed and moved on. That's on you, Carlos. Not me. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off and sat in the dark apartment, thinking about the expression on Carlos's face when he'd looked at Daniel and David for the first time. The shock, the calculation, the rapid processing that had led to a conclusion he clearly hadn't wanted to reach. He knew they were his. And now I had to decide what happened next. Carlos Gould just saw his twin sons for the first time after ordering Stephanie to abort them 6 years ago. And Stephanie hung up on him when he tried to demand access? Subscribe right now because these next lines of the story is about what happens when a man who controls everything realizes he threw away the one thing he can't get back. And the twist? Stephanie didn't seek him out for revenge. She did it because her sons deserve to know their father exists. Even if that father is Carlos Gould. Carlos showed up at my apartment 3 days later. I don't know how he found my address. Same way he'd found my phone number, presumably. Resources. Money. The kind of reach that made privacy mostly theoretical for anyone Carlos Gould wanted to locate.
It was 6 p.m.
I'd just gotten home from work. The boys were at my father's house. He watched them 3 afternoons a week while I worked late. I opened the door to find Carlos standing in my apartment building's hallway, looking profoundly out of place in his expensive suit among the worn carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. You can't just show up at my home, I said. Can I come in?
No.
Stephanie, please. 5 minutes. Against every instinct, I stepped aside. Carlos entered my apartment slowly, taking in everything. The worn couch I'd bought secondhand, the toy trucks scattered across the living room floor, the kitchen table covered in the boys' drawings from school. The evidence of 6 years. 6 years of a life he knew nothing about. They're not here, I said. If that's why you came. I came to talk to you. Then talk. He turned to face me. And for the first time since I'd known him, Carlos Gould looked uncertain. I want to be part of their lives, he said. Why? Because they're my children. They've been your children for 6 years. That didn't seem to matter before Saturday. I didn't know. We've established that. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. But Carlos, here's the thing. You can't just walk back into this because biology says you're their father. Fatherhood isn't DNA. It's showing up, being there, making choices that put your children first. You've done none of that. Because I didn't know they existed. Because you gave me an order to make sure they didn't exist. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're right. The admission surprised me. Carlos Gould didn't admit wrongness, didn't acknowledge mistakes, built his entire empire on the principle that he was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I was wrong, he continued. 6 years ago, when you told me you were pregnant, my response was he paused. Cruel, unnecessary, and wrong. Apology noted. Doesn't change the situation. I know. But Stephanie, those boys, Daniel and David, they're mine. And he stopped. I need to know them. I need to be part of their lives.
Why now?
Why not yesterday or last year, or any of the thousands of days between when I walked out of your office and when you saw them at the park? Because I didn't know they existed until Saturday. And if I hadn't deliberately put them in front of you, if I'd kept them hidden another 6 years, another 12, would you still be sitting in your office, believing I'd followed your order and eliminated the complication? Yes, he said quietly. Yes, I would. The honesty was unexpected, and somehow worse than if he'd lied. So, what do you want? I asked. Visitation? Joint custody?
Money?
What is this conversation actually about, Carlos? I want to be their father. You can't be. That position was abolished 6 years ago. Then what can I be? I looked at him, at this man who controlled so much and understood so little about the things that actually mattered. You can be someone who shows up, I said. Consistently. Reliably. Not because you're their biological father. That's just genetics. But because you choose to be present. Every week. Every month. For years. You can be someone they learn to trust. I can do that. Can you? Carlos, your world is dangerous. You've built your entire life on control and secrecy and keeping the people close to you at arm's length. Can you really integrate 2 6-year-old boys into that world without putting them at risk? He didn't answer immediately. I could see him processing the question, running through scenarios, calculating risks, doing what Carlos always did when confronted with complex problems. I'll protect them, he said finally. That's not the same as being a father. Then teach me. He looked at me directly. Stephanie, I have no idea how to do this. I've never. Parenting isn't something I planned for. It's not something I thought I'd ever, he stopped. But they exist. And they're mine. And I will not walk away a second time. Even if it's dangerous for them. Even if your world puts them at risk. I'll keep them safe. Whatever it takes. You can't promise that. Nobody can. The world is dangerous, Carlos. Your world is more dangerous than most. Then we make it less dangerous. Together. He took a step closer. Let me try. Let me meet them properly. Spend time with them. Learn who they are. And if it doesn't work, if it's too dangerous or too complicated, I'll step back. But Stephanie, don't deny me the chance to try. I wanted to say no. Wanted to protect my boys from the inevitable disappointment when Carlos realized that fatherhood required more than strategic planning and resource allocation. But Daniel had been asking questions lately. About fathers. About why some kids had dads and he didn't. Questions I deflected with vague answers about different kinds of families that didn't satisfy a 6-year-old's need for concrete information. One condition, I said. Name it. You don't tell them you're their father. Not yet. Not until we see if this actually works. You're Carlos. A friend. Someone I used to know. They can get to know you as a person first. And if this goes well, we can talk about telling them the truth later. Agreed. And the moment this becomes dangerous for them, The moment your world touches theirs in any way that puts them at risk, you disappear.
Completely.
Non-negotiation. Agreed. I studied him. This man I'd loved 6 years ago. This stranger standing in my apartment promising things I wasn't sure he could deliver. Saturday, I said. 10 a.m. There's a playground 3 blocks from here. Bring coffee. We'll see how you do with 2 hyperactive 6-year-olds who don't sit still and don't follow orders. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. I'll be there. Saturday morning, 9:58 a.m. I was at the playground with Daniel and David, watching them tear across the jungle gym with the kind of fearless energy that made my heart stop every time they climbed too high or jumped too far. Carlos arrived at exactly 10 a.m., 2 coffees in hand, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, the most casual I'd ever seen him, looking uncomfortable in a way that would have been funny if the situation weren't so weighted. Daniel saw him first, ran over with his usual lack of restraint. You're the man from the park. The one who looks like us. Carlos looked down at his son, and something flickered across his face that I'd never seen before. Not a shock. Not calculation. Something softer. Carlos said. My name is Carlos. What's yours? I'm Daniel. That's David. Daniel pointed at his brother, who was approaching more slowly, watching Carlos with a careful assessment David always applied to new people. Do you know our mom?
Ida.
We used to work together. A long time ago. Are you here to play? If that's okay with you. Daniel grabbed Carlos's hand, a gesture so natural and instinctive that it made my chest tight, and started pulling him toward the jungle gym. Come on, we'll show you the best spots. I watched Carlos let himself be led across the playground by a 6-year-old, the expensive coffee forgotten on the bench beside me, and thought, this is really happening. A Mafia boss is being dragged to a jungle gym by the twin sons he ordered aborted 6 years ago? And he's wearing jeans? And he just let a 6-year-old grab his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world? Subscribe because watching Carlos Gould learn to be a father while running a criminal empire and protecting his sons from enemies who will use them as leverage is going to be the most emotionally devastating thing you've ever read. For 3 weeks, Carlos showed up every Saturday. 10 a.m. coffee for me, juice boxes for the boys. He played with them, listened to their endless stories, learned to recognize the difference between Daniel's impulsiveness and David's careful planning. He was awkward at first, unsure how to talk to children, how to engage with their world of dinosaurs and superheroes and rules that changed mid-game. But he tried. Every week.
Consistently.
The boys adore him. Daniel especially saw Carlos as this mysterious adult who actually listened and played and didn't treat them like they were fragile. David was more cautious, but warming gradually. I watched it happen with complicated feelings. Gratitude that Carlos was actually showing up. Fear that he'd disappear as suddenly as he'd arrived. And something else, something I hadn't expected. Watching Carlos learn to be gentle with my sons, to set aside the controlled, calculating mask he wore for the rest of the world, was seeing someone I'd never met before. Someone I wasn't sure Carlos himself had met. On week 4, everything changed. I got a call Wednesday evening. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Ms. Moody? Male voice. Accent I couldn't place. Professional.
Cold.
Who is this? A friend. I'm calling to give you some advice. I don't need advice from strangers. You do, because you're involved with Carlos Gould, and that involvement has made you visible to people who have reasons to dislike Mr. Gould. My entire body went cold. What are you talking about? Your sons, Daniel and David. Beautiful boys. They look very much like their father. I stood up from the couch, started walking toward the boys' bedroom where they were sleeping. If you go anywhere near my children, I don't need to go near them, Ms. Moody. I just need you to understand that we know they exist. And if Mr. Gould doesn't reconsider his current business arrangements, specifically his expansion into territories that belong to other organizations, those boys become relevant. You're threatening my children. I'm informing you of a situation. What you do with that information is your choice. But I'd suggest you discuss it with Mr. Gould. Soon. The call ended. I stood in my son's bedroom doorway, watching them sleep. Daniel sprawled across his bed, David curled tight, and felt the ground shift beneath everything I'd built for 6 years.
Threat.
Real threat. From people who knew about my boys. Who saw them as leverage. I called Carlos. Stephanie? What's? Someone just called me. Threatened the boys. Said they know they're yours. Said if you don't back off some business expansion, the boys become relevant. Carlos, what the hell is happening? The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then Carlos said something that made my blood freeze. Pack bags for you and the boys.
Right now.
I'm sending security to your apartment. You're all coming with me until we handle this. Handle what? Carlos.
Rivera.
Head of a competing organization. We've been in conflict over territory for months. I thought it was contained. Clearly it's not. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. Stephanie, listen to me very carefully. Pack essential items only. My security team will be there in 12 minutes. Do not leave the apartment until they arrive. Do not answer the door for anyone except them. They'll have identification. Verify it before you open the door. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. But you're also going to be safe. I promise you that. The call ended. I stared at my sleeping sons. At the life I'd built that was suddenly, catastrophically unraveling. And I thought, this is what you warned him about. This is the danger you told him would come. Except it was too late now. We were already in the middle of it. The security team arrived in 11 minutes.
2 men.
Professional.
Armed.
They showed identification, credentials from a security firm I recognized as one of Carlos's legitimate businesses. Ms. Moody, we're here to escort you and your children to a secure location. Do you have bags packed? I'd packed one suitcase. Clothes for the boys, essentials for me. Moved on autopilot while my brain tried to process what was happening. Yes. Excellent. We're going to walk you to the vehicle. Stay between us. Do not stop for anyone. The boys, can they walk on their own, or do we need to carry them? They're 6, not infants. They can walk. I woke Daniel and David, dressed them quickly, whispering that we were going on an adventure. They were too sleepy to ask questions. The security team moved us through the apartment building with military precision. Down the stairs, not the elevator. Through a back exit I hadn't known existed. Into an SUV with tinted windows that was already running. We drove for 40 minutes. The boys fell back asleep in the car. I watched the city give way to suburbs give way to a gated estate I'd never seen before. Carlos's house. Not the penthouse apartment where we'd spent time 6 years ago. A property I hadn't known he owned, sprawling, isolated, surrounded by walls and cameras and security that made it clear this was a fortress disguised as a home. Carlos was waiting at the door when we arrived. He took the suitcase from me without a word. Looked at the sleeping boys in the security team's arms. Put them in the east bedroom. 2nd floor. It's already prepared. The security team moved quickly. Professional. Like they'd done this before. Carlos turned to me. You and I need to talk.
Now.
We walked to his study.
Dark wood.
Floor-to-ceiling windows that probably had bulletproof glass. A desk that looked like command central for an operation I was only beginning to understand. Sit, Carlos said.
Y sit.
Tell me everything. Rivera's organization and mine have been in conflict for 8 months. Territory disputes. Mostly professional, negotiated, strategic, manageable. Until last month when Rivera learned about you and the boys.
How?
I don't know yet. I've had my security team investigating since Saturday, since you brought them to the park. Someone saw us together, made the connection, started asking questions. Rivera's people are good at finding answers. So this is my fault for making them visible.
No.
This is my fault for not anticipating it, for thinking I could keep two separate worlds, my organization and my family, isolated from each other indefinitely. Carlos leaned against the desk. I underestimated how quickly information travels, how thoroughly Rivera watches me. That's on me. What does Rivera want?
Territory.
Contracts. Money. The same things everyone wants. But now he has leverage he didn't have before. Carlos looked at me directly. He thinks threatening the boys will make me back down from expansions that cut into his operations. And will it? Yes. The answer surprised me. Carlos Gould didn't back down, didn't retreat, built his entire reputation on never showing weakness. You're giving him what he wants. I'm giving him what he thinks he wants while neutralizing him permanently. There's a difference. Carlos pulled up a file on his computer. Rivera's organization is built on weaknesses he's hidden well, financial leverage I've been documenting for months, connections to law enforcement that are provably corrupt, and a partner who's been skimming money for 2 years. I give him territory. He celebrates the win. And 3 months from now, his entire organization implodes from internal collapse I've engineered. I stared at him. At the calm, methodical way he explained destroying a man's criminal empire as collateral damage for threatening his children. Carlos. They threaten my sons, Stephanie. There's no scenario where that doesn't end with Rivera losing everything. I thought you said violence wasn't your method. It's not. I'm not killing anyone. I'm just making sure Rivera's organization can't function. His partners will turn on him. His financial backers will abandon him. His protection will evaporate. And he'll spend the rest of his life understanding that you don't touch what belongs to Carlos Gould. The boys don't belong to you. They're mine.
His voice was flat.
Absolute. And anyone who threatens them forfeits the right to exist in my world. That's not negotiable. We stayed at the estate for 6 days. The boys thought it was a vacation. Pool, massive playroom, private playground in the backyard. They had no idea we were there because someone had threatened to use them as leverage in a criminal conflict. Carlos spent every evening with them. Dinner together. Stories before bed. Learning their routines and preferences and the 1,000 small details of who they were. On day 5, David got sick. Started with a fever. Then breathing problems. Then something worse, a seizure that came out of nowhere and left David unconscious on the floor of the playroom while Daniel screamed and Carlos called emergency services. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. The hospital was 12 minutes from the estate. David was admitted to intensive care with a diagnosis I didn't understand, some genetic condition with a name I couldn't pronounce, and implications the doctors explained carefully, professionally, devastatingly. It's hereditary. Passed from father to child.
Rare.
About 1 in 50,000 people carry the gene. When it activates, usually in childhood, it requires immediate treatment. Without treatment, the condition is life-threatening. I sat in the hospital waiting room, holding Daniel while he cried, and thought, this is my fault. I should have known. Should have had them tested. Should have. Carlos appeared in the doorway. He'd been with David in the ICU. Looked exhausted. Devastated. He needs a bone marrow transplant.
Urgently.
Within weeks. Can I be tested? As a donor? You're not genetically compatible. The condition requires a match from someone with the same genetic mutation. The doctors are searching databases, but Carlos stopped. The best chance is a family member who carries the gene. Your family? Yes. Do you have siblings? Cousins? Anyone who could. I have a brother. We haven't spoken in 12 years. But I'm calling him tonight. Carlos sat down beside me. Looked at Daniel, who'd fallen asleep against my shoulder. And Stephanie, there's something else. Something the doctors told me while you were out here.
What?
The gene is dominant. which means he looked at Daniel. Both boys carry it. David's activated early. Daniel might never have symptoms, or might have them tomorrow. We don't know. I stared at Carlos, at this man who'd ordered me to abort these children 6 years ago, who was now sitting in a hospital waiting room learning that both his sons carried a genetic condition that could kill them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. This is my fault. My genetics. If you'd listened to me 6 years ago, if you'd gotten rid of it like I told you, you wouldn't be sitting here watching your son fight for his life because of a gene I passed to him. Don't. I kept my voice low, controlled. Don't you dare make this about your guilt. David is sick. That's biology. Bad luck. Not your fault and not mine. What matters now is fixing it. I'll fix it. Whatever it takes. I'll get David the transplant. I'll make sure he survives this. And after? If Daniel gets sick? If this gene activates in him too? Then we handle it. Together. Because they're not going through this alone. Neither of you are. I looked at him. At Carlos Gould, Mafia boss, criminal, man who'd ordered me to eliminate the complications 6 years ago, who is now promising to move heaven and earth to save the sons he'd thrown away. They need to know, I said quietly. Know what? That you're their father. Not just Carlos. Not just a friend. The truth. Because if we're doing this, if we're fighting this together, they deserve to know who you actually are. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then, okay. When David's stable, when he's out of danger, we tell them together. One of the twins has a genetic condition that came from Carlos, and he needs a bone marrow transplant from Carlos's estranged brother, and both boys carry the gene, which means Daniel could get sick at any time. Subscribe because these next chapters are about Carlos Gould facing actual consequences, not the strategic kind he can manipulate his way out of, but the real, terrifying kind where money and power can't save your children, and all you can do is hope biology cooperates. This is about to break your heart. David's surgery happened 3 weeks later. Carlos's brother, Vincent Gould, flew in from Denver. They hadn't spoken in 12 years. Family conflict I didn't fully understand and didn't ask about. But Vincent was a match. Perfect compatibility. The surgery went smoothly. David recovered in the hospital for 2 weeks. Carlos was there every day. Morning, afternoon, evening. Learning to be the father he'd never planned to become. Daniel visited daily. Brought drawings. Told stories. Made his brother laugh even when David was too weak to do much more than smile. On the day David was discharged, we brought him back to my apartment, not the estate. Back to the small, normal life I'd built before Carlos re-entered it. Rivera's organization had collapsed 2 weeks prior, exactly as Carlos had planned. The threat was gone. We didn't need the fortress anymore. That evening, after David was settled in bed resting and Daniel was coloring at the kitchen table, Carlos and I sat on my couch and had the conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. They need to know, I said. I know. Tomorrow. We will tell them tomorrow. Carlos nodded. Together. The next morning, I gathered both boys on the couch. Daniel bouncing with his usual energy. David quieter, still recovering but stable. Guys, Carlos and I need to talk to you about something important, I started. Carlos sat across from us, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. You know how some families have moms and dads? I continued carefully. And some families just have moms or just have dads. And all of them are real families? Yeah, Daniel said. Like Tommy at school only has his grandma.
Right. Our family has been just me and you two for a long time.
But there's something I need to tell you about your father. David's eyes went sharp. Focused. We have a father? You do. And I looked at Carlos. He's here. Daniel looked around. Where? Right there. I pointed at Carlos. Carlos is your father. The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Daniel launched himself across the room and into Carlos's lap, talking a mile a minute. You're our dad? Really? That's why we look the same. I knew it. I told David you look like us. David moved more slowly, approached Carlos cautiously, looked up at him with those analytical eyes that were identical to his father's. Why weren't you here before? David asked. The question hit like a blade.
Direct.
Unflinching. The kind of question adults learn not to ask. Carlos looked at David, at his 6-year-old son, who'd just spent 3 weeks fighting for his life, and told the truth. Because I made a mistake. 6 years ago, when your mom told me you were coming, I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't think I could do it. So, I told your mom I didn't want you. You didn't want us? Daniel's voice was smaller now. I didn't know what wanting you meant. I thought it was about. Carlos stopped. Started again, simpler. I was wrong. Very wrong. And I'm sorry. I should have been here from the beginning. I should have been your dad for all 6 years, not just these last few months. But you're here now, David said. Right? I'm here now. And I'm staying. If. Carlos looked at me, then back at the boys. If you want me to. Daniel was already nodding enthusiastically. David studied Carlos for a long moment. Then, okay, you can be our dad. But you have to come to our school thing next month. All the dads are coming. I'll be there. And you have to teach us the things you do with computers. Daniel says you're really good at computers. I can do that. And David paused. You have to promise you won't leave again. Carlos looked at his son. At this child who'd almost died because of a gene Carlos had passed to him, who was now asking for the one promise that mattered. I promise, Carlos said. I'm not leaving. Not ever. David nodded, satisfied, then climbed into Carlos's lap beside his brother. And I watched Carlos Gould, a man who'd built an empire on control and strategy and never showing weakness, hold his twin sons for the first time since learning they existed, looking like someone who'd just discovered the only thing in his life he couldn't afford to lose. 2 years later, I'm sitting in the audience at Daniel and David's elementary school. Spring concert. The boys are in the front row of the choir, singing enthusiastically off-key. Carlos is beside me, holding my hand. The way he's held my hand to every school event, every doctor's appointment, every normal Saturday morning at the playground for the past 2 years. Daniel spots us and waves. Enthusiastically. Mid-song. David notices and elbows his brother, whispering something that's probably, pay attention to the song. They're both healthy. David's condition is managed with medication and regular checkups. Daniel never developed symptoms. The genetic lottery gave us one crisis and one miracle. Carlos squeezed my hand. They're amazing. They are. Thank you. For what? For not listening to me. 6 years ago, when I told you to get rid of it. He looked at me. Thank you for being stubborn and brave and raising them when I was too much of a coward to stay. You're here now. I'm here now. And Stephanie, he paused. I know we've been taking this slowly. Co-parenting. Learning to trust each other again. But Are you about to propose to me at our son's elementary school concert? Would that be inappropriate? Spectacularly inappropriate. Then I'll wait until after. He smiled. The genuine smile I'd learned to recognize. The one that only appeared around me and the boys. But yes, I'm going to ask. And I'm hoping you'll say yes. I looked at him. At this man who'd spent 2 years learning to be a father, learning to be present, learning to choose something other than control and strategy. Who'd shown up every day for 2 years.
Consistently.
Ask me later, I said. When the boys aren't watching.
Deal.
The concert ended. Daniel and David ran to us, talking over each other about the performance and who sang the loudest and whether we'd heard David's solo. We walked out together. A family. Not the family I'd planned 6 years ago. Not the family Carlos had refused to acknowledge. But the family we'd built. Together. From consequences and choices, and the stubborn refusal to give up on something that mattered. Carlos had ordered me to get rid of it. I'd refused. And that refusal, that single moment of defiance, had given us everything.
The end.
Get rid of it. 3 words that should have ended everything. 3 words that, instead, created 2 boys who looked exactly like their father, and who gave that father a reason to become something other than the man who'd given the order. Consequence isn't always punishment. Sometimes consequence is exactly what we need.
I'm Stephanie Moody.
I'm a mother. And I'm the woman who refused to obey. A mafia boss ordered his pregnant girlfriend to abort. She refused. Raised twins for 6 years. Then deliberately made him see them. One of the boys got sick with a genetic condition from their father. And Carlos Gould spent 2 years learning to be an actual father instead of just a man who controls things. This is what redemption looks like. Messy, terrifying, earned through showing up every single day. Subscribe because next week's story features a woman who discovers her husband's late nights at work are actually him running an underground fight ring, and she decides to enter the ring herself to win him back. It's going to be brutal. See you there. So, real talk. Did Carlos deserve a second chance after ordering Stephanie to abort? Or should she have kept the boys away from him permanently? A. He deserved it. He showed up consistently for 2 years, learned to be a father, and saved David's life. B. He didn't deserve it. Throwing away your children then coming back when it's convenient isn't redemption, it's selfishness. C. Both. He didn't deserve it, but the boys deserve to know their father, so Stephanie made the right choice for them even if Carlos hadn't earned it. D. None of this matters because watching a mafia boss get dragged to a jungle gym by twin 6-year-olds and learn to be gentle is the most satisfying character arc ever written. Drop your answer below. And more importantly, was Stephanie right to deliberately seek Carlos out and force the confrontation? Or should she have let the boys grow up, never knowing their father existed? Also, the moment David asked Carlos to promise he wouldn't leave again, did that hit harder than any other scene in the entire story? Or was it when Carlos had to tell the boys he'd made a mistake and didn't want them at first? Sound off in the comments. This story proved that consequence isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's exactly the thing that forces us to become who we were always meant to be.